There were many Mennonite craftsmen, cabinet makers, who continued building furniture once they had settled here in Kansas. 13 separate parts that then get assembled. This would facilitate moving this large piece into a rather more modest home.
Let me introduce you to Andi Schmidt Andres. She has worked at the Kauffman Museum since 1993. The majority of her time at the museum has been spent as Curator of Education. In that position, she was responsible for special events, educational programs for children, families, and adults, the museum's store, and volunteers, including student staff. In her role as the museum educator, she has led over 50 bus tours for senior adults to sites in Kansas and nearby states, and hosted over 1,500 field trips to the museum for over 65,000 children and more. Wow. In August 2020, Andi became director of the Kauffman Museum. As the director, she has added project coordination, administrative work, long-term planning, and financial management to her list of responsibilities. Andi graduated from Bethel College with degrees in German and environmental studies, with an emphasis in education, which has not gone unnoticed. Prior to her employment at the Kauffman Museum, she worked in public programming and site management for the City of Colorado Springs Parks Department. Andi lives outside Newton on a farm with her husband, her daughter, a dog, a few goats, and some barn cats. Andi, we are interested to hear the presentation that you and your colleagues will be offering to us tonight.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And I'd say the key to that introduction is the presentation with my colleagues, because this was definitely a group effort. You'll hear their names again and see their names across the bottom of the screen. Before we get started, I'd like to note that we're talking tonight mostly about European immigrants and their history. But there were people living in Kansas long before those immigrants came to this area. So I would like to take a moment to recognize that Kauffman Museum stands on the prairie where many original peoples hunted and farmed before the arrival of European and American settlers, particularly the Wichita, the Kaw, also known as the Kansa or Kansa, and also the Osage lived in this area. As you learn about Kauffman Museum exhibitions this evening, we hope that you honor the contributions Native Americans have made to our nation's heritage, and in fact, our continent's heritage, and commit to respecting their descendants and learning about their rich cultural traditions. And with that, I'm going to let Sandra go ahead and start our program, and we're eager to share Kauffman Museum with all of you.
Thank you to Tour Imagination for planning these virtual tours. We're thrilled to pieces to be able to bring Kauffman Museum to a wider audience. Kauffman Museum tells the story of Mennonites coming to the Central Plains of the United States and Canada in the 1870s, and the prairie landscape that they encountered, the Native Americans that were forcibly removed just prior to the Mennonites' arrival, and cultures where the Mennonites went in missions after they were well settled. But today we want to talk about movement of individuals, families, congregations, moving from country to country, and what kinds of things, from continent to continent, what kinds of things they decided to bring along. Most specifically, what kinds of furniture did they decide to bring along? We'll hear from Reinhild Kauenhoven Janzen, the original curator of the Mennonite furniture collection here at Kauffman Museum. We'll hear about a specific artifact that the museum holds, the historic cabinet organ, and how it moved across Europe, across an ocean, and then across the United States, Ohio to Kansas, eventually finding its home here in North Newton, Kansas. And last, we'll hear about exhibits from Kauffman Museum that move across the continent, Canada, the United States. And these are exhibits curated and fabricated by Kauffman Museum staff, made to be moved to sites like museums, libraries, archives, and churches. First off, we'll start again with that Mennonite furniture collection, and I'd like to welcome Reinhild Kauenhoven Janzen.
So we are in the exhibition of Mennonite furniture from the Vistula Delta and southern Russia region. I'm starting you all off with this big, somewhat simplified map, but you can see that, let's focus on Europe. And you see the big yellow dot that is at the Baltic Sea, that is the Vistula Delta region in what is now Poland, and was Poland in the 16th century, when Mennonites migrated from the Netherlands, where they had lived for a long time. Mennonites from the Netherlands moved to the Vistula Delta for religious freedom. Essentially, the Polish king had invited them to settle there. They had been persecuted in the Netherlands. So they then settled in the late 16th century in the Vistula Delta in Poland. And in the later part of the 18th century, they moved on the invitation of Catherine the Great to the Ukraine or to southern Russia, where they were allowed to settle and have land and have their own schools. Some of them, the other in the middle, they're in the south of Poland. Others migrated there from Switzerland and also from the Netherlands. And then you can see the sweep of migrations that happened in the late 19th century from what was then Prussia and from southern Russia. And with all of these dots, they migrated to the plain states of North America, into all the way up into Manitoba, and brought their belongings with them. So everything in this exhibition was brought along from those regions, and then also some of it built here. We are here in front of the oldest dowry chest in our collection. It was made by fine craftsmen in the region out of ash veneer, and then with darker inlay in a very ornate pattern. The dowry chests had always could be locked because they harbored, or they contained the family dowries, that is bed linens and linens. And if you can take a good look at the also the beautiful interior, the key plate is very ornate, and the tinned ironwork and the hinges are very ornate in a style that would date the chest back to the late 18th century, so around 1790 or earlier. And then one reason for the key is that this small compartment inside the chest would hold money and would hold maybe jewelry. So this is a very beautiful, let's say, high-end piece of furniture that well-to-do Mennonites could afford. When you could not afford hardwood furniture like this, then you would get a chest made out of softwood and paint it. In 1882, a Mennonite family in the what we call the Molochna colony, one of the early colonies in South Russia, gave this chest to their daughter. Now this chest, in contrast to the one we just saw, is made from soft pine, and then it is very delicately painted to simulate the light color of ash veneer or of hardwood veneer. and the decoration corresponds in style to the one that we saw on the other earlier chest, to simulate inlay, but it is all painted. So we are looking at another painted chest, but here I just want to point out how women often pasted keepsakes or, pictures that intrigued them or that they felt very sentimental about. We are standing here in front of the oldest wardrobe brought by a Mennonite family from the Vistula Delta to this country. This style that we see in this wardrobe is typical of early and mid 19th century European furniture style. So the Mennonites embraced the culture around them. They had lived in this area for hundreds of years. Now here we have a wardrobe that is somewhat smaller in scale than the one we just looked at. This was actually built by a Mennonite craftsman. There were many Mennonite craftsmen, cabinet makers, who continued building furniture once they had settled here in Kansas. So this was a wardrobe made by a Mennonite craftsman in Kansas in around 1885, 5-10 years after they migrated here. This particular wardrobe, also made of pine and then with simulated very dramatic graining, was also made by a Mennonite craftsman who immigrated from southern Russia, from the Molochna colony to Kansas. This was made around 1885. What we can see here is that is made up of component parts, of 13 separate parts that then get assembled. This would facilitate moving this large piece into a rather more modest home. Thanks to very astute Mennonite collectors, such as Ethel Abrahams, who assisted me with the research for this collection and interpretation. She collected the tools that Mennonite craftsmen used for their painted furniture. And then we also wanted to highlight the great skill in joinery that cabinets display, and also the other furniture in this exhibition. So all of these wooden blocks that you see here actually are the different kinds of joints that the cabinet makers mastered. The Mennonite cabinet maker Franz Adrian emigrated from southern Russia to Kansas with his family in the late 19th century. All of these pieces that you see here, the wardrobe, the door, the chimney cabinet, the corner cabinet, were made by him for his family home. He made this wardrobe in one piece, in contrast to the wardrobes that were, a few wardrobes that were brought from the Vistula Delta that could be disassembled and reassembled. This cabinet maker's daughter is said to have painted the lovely floral ornaments on his cabinets, on this particular wardrobe on the door.
I'm David Kreider, technician and collections coordinator here at Kauffman Museum, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our historic cabinet organ. The Teschemacher-Deknatel-vander Smissen organ. It gets its long name from the name of the builder, the original owner, and his family descendants. The organ's Odyssey can be traced across 270 years of travel from Germany to Holland, back to Germany, to Ohio, and then finally on to Kansas. I'd like to tell you a brief history of this organ's Odyssey. In 1750, the German organ builder Jakob Teschemacher completed this 6-stop cabinet organ for Johannes Deknatel, who was a Mennonite minister in Amsterdam. And it was built to be used in Deknatel's home, not the church. Organs were introduced into the Dutch churches about 15 years later, in the late 1700s. In 1796, this organ was shipped to Hamburg when Deknatel's daughter Hillegande married a prominent merchant, Jacob vander Smissen. The organ continued moving in Europe with the vander Smissen family, several generations of whom were Mennonite ministers. The organ traveled between Hamburg, Danzig, and Friedrichstadt, where in 1850, during the Danish Holstein War, it was damaged by occupying troops. In 1868, Pastor Carl Justus vander Smissen brought the organ with him to Ohio when he became the headmaster of the first Mennonite institution of higher learning in the Wadsworth Institute, where it was thought to have been played during services there. In 1900, the organ came to Kansas when Carl's daughter Wilhelmina was invited to supervise a deaconess hospital in Gossel. She then, with her brother Carl, donated this instrument to Bethel College in 1910. Kauffman Museum has been the organ's caretaker since 1940, and we're privileged to have the only Teschemacher organ outside of Europe, and to be able to preserve this important artifact which illustrates a Mennonite family's migration story. The instrument's last major journey was in 2007 when we disassembled the organ, packed it, and drove it to the Nowak Organ Company in Massachusetts. There it received an extensive, historically accurate renovation, bringing the instrument back to its 1750 playing condition. We now display the organ prominently in our auditorium and use it for recitals. And now, via the capable hands of Karen Baumann-Schleybaugh, retired professor of music at Bethel College, let's listen to the voice of the historic Teschemacher-Deknatel-vander Smissen organ.
My name is Chuck Regier, Curator of Exhibits at Kauffman Museum. Kauffman Museum is located in a sparsely populated area. By designing exhibits to travel, our collection and the stories they tell can be shared with a much larger audience. Traveling exhibits allow us to leverage a larger revenue stream than would be possible for the traditional temporary installation. In 1990, Kauffman Museum opened the Mirror of the Martyrs exhibit, inspired by the rediscovery and purchase of 23 copper etchings used to print the 1685 edition of the Martyr's Mirror. When raising funds to purchase these rare works of art, the decision was made to also fund the development of a mobile exhibit to present this story across North America. Our desire was to create a high-quality exhibit that was dramatic and visually compelling, but that would also be cost-effective to transport, quick to install, and easy to pack. The display panels are connected to an aluminum structure with Velcro, making them easy to reconfigure, take off and reconfigure in different locations, but also to house the electrical wiring necessary for the exhibit lighting. We chose to add lighting to the exhibit because we knew that in many venues there would not be track lighting and other museum amenities. Rather than building crates and paying to ship the exhibit, we purchased a used 15-foot moving van, outfitted to safely pack the exhibit components. With a museum staff member and a team of dedicated volunteers, the exhibit was driven from venue to venue, offered for a modest fee. During its first 10 years on the road, Mirror of the Martyrs was installed at more than 60 venues across the US and Canada, at colleges, churches, art galleries, libraries, and other venues, including an Amish barn and a machine shed. Some of you may have seen the exhibit at one of these locations. An addition to our building in 2004 created a home base for the Mirror of the Martyrs, and this continues to be a valuable resource, using these stories from the past to ask probing and relevant questions for today. The exhibit is available for booking. Following the production of the Mirror of the Martyrs, Kauffman Museum continued to develop traveling exhibits, refining our craft, expanding into this niche museum market. Some of these exhibits were created at the invitation of collectors to feature their treasures, while others were designed and produced on contract for other organizations. Realizing that a dedicated truck is not practical for all exhibits, we explored ways in which the exhibit display components could also function as shipping crates. The When Disaster Strikes exhibit was produced for Mennonite Disaster Service to commemorate their 50th anniversary. Each crate contains all elements for one exhibit module and could be set up in a few minutes. This concept was used to create an exhibit telling the story of the American bison, which Kauffman Museum tours on behalf of the National Buffalo Foundation. In 2014, Kauffman Museum was approached by a local thrift store with items that had been held back from sale due to concerns over racist imagery or content. We developed an exhibit using these items to promote community conversations around issues of stereotyping and racism. The Sorting Out Race exhibit used these crates that turn inside out to become display cases. Designed to look like a storefront, the exhibit is entered as though opening the door to a local thrift shop. The crate display cases represent the exhibit themes and ask questions and invite deeper reflection. Some of you may have seen this exhibit at one of its 11 installations, possibly at the California State University in Fresno, the Depot MCC Thrift Shop in Goshen, or Rainbow Mennonite Church in Kansas City. Sorting Out Race received a Leadership in History Award from the American Association of State and Local History. With the approach of the 100th anniversary of World War I, our museum team worked with historian James Youngke to tell the story of conscientious objectors and resistance to that war. The Voices of Conscience exhibit is built around a reconstruction of a prison cell where Hutterite brothers Jacob and Joseph Hofer were held and tortured at Alcatraz prison, later dying at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. Using stories of courage and nonviolent resistance from the past, Voices of Conscience raises issues relevant for today, and was also recognized with a national award. This too is an exhibit some of you may have already seen, with 19 installations to date, as far north as Winnipeg and Steinbach, at Anabaptist colleges and universities, including Elizabethtown, CMU, Goshen, Bluffton, and EMU. Host communities have used Voices of Conscience to highlight their own stories of conscience, providing a catalyst for local dialogue. Both of these exhibits are available to travel, and we continue to develop future traveling exhibits. Exhibits that tell stories to challenge and inspire the Anabaptist community today. To learn more and to bring one of our exhibits to your community, visit kaufmanmuseum.org.
Thank you very much to Chuck, to Dave, to Karen, to Reinhild for telling their part in the Kauffman Museum story. Again, we're so glad that Tour Imagination has been able to do these virtual tours, and we hope sometime you'll be able to visit Central Kansas to see some of the things that we've talked about, or perhaps you'll want to talk to us about some of the exhibits that we have that travel. We have both the museum website and the museum email up on the screen. You're welcome to copy those down. Perhaps someone can put them in the chat also. And with that, we'd be happy to hear your stories or take your questions. We'll have everyone on the line tonight that was a part of the program. So let us know what you think.
So the questions, I'll just read off the questions so everybody knows what's going on. How's the organ powered? Is it a pump? Yeah, everybody wants to know how that incredible organ works. I love those little whirly gigs going while she's playing. So the information I need to find Reinhild is, what is her husband's first name?
John.
John. Okay, thank you.
John M.
M. Okay, thank you.
There are 10, 12 questions about how the air is supplied to the organ. Originally, it was a bellows, and about 50 years ago, there was a slight restoration of the organ. An electric blower was added. When we did our major restoration in 2007, that electric motor was removed and the bellows was repaired, and it is now, air is all supplied by a foot, by the pedal on the bottom. If you watch the stars here, you can see that's connected to the bellows and they turn. Some of you may have noticed a movement behind here when Karen Schlebaugh was playing. Her husband was pumping at a secondary pumping station behind the organ.
Whoever posted that in the Q&A that they suspected somebody was pumping from behind, you were right.
And that lever had gotten lost through time. And so Fritz Nowak, who restored the organ, rediscovered the function of a mortise at the back and reinstituted a secondary pumping station. So the answer is, organ is supplied by foot power in front or lever action in back. It's human powered via bellows.
Amazing.
And if you're here, you could hear it creaking as that action happens rather than the sound of an electric blower.
Okay.
Marvelous.
And I don't know, Dave, if you made this clear, but those little whirly gigs actually are gauges that show how much air is left in the bellows. So as the bellows go down, they turn, and then when you pump, they go back up again.
Correct.
Excellent. Alvin is asking, are the black and white keys reversed on the organ?
Yes, the sharps are, the main keys are black, and the sharps are bone. The main keys are ebonized wood, and the light keys are a bone with pear wood underneath them.
Okay. Wow. Robert is asking, does the museum have any Kroger clocks in its collection or any other types of clocks?
Well, one thing I would say, Andy, before she answers that, is in the background, if you look closely behind me, I think there's probably at least one.
Yeah, I can see it back there
Kind
on
of small, but to the back.
our left. It's quite
There's
small.
one right there.
Okay. We have a question for you already, Reinhild. Can you talk to us about the clocks in the museum?
Actually, that was cut out of out of the original taping. I mean, the clocks, yeah, we had a time limit. But the clocks are absolutely key, a very iconic part of the migration furniture that people from the Vistula Delta and from South Russia brought. You know, my parents gave us a clock like that, a modern one. They are still made in the Netherlands. Because John had said, wouldn't it be nice to have a pendulum clock so the ticking is like the soul of our house or the heartbeat of the house?
Beautiful.
It regulated people's lives, which we cannot quite understand. And anyway, Mennonites didn't have church bells, for example, that you have in traditional villages in Europe that would regulate them. Right. So John is showing one of the clocks in our book.
Lovely.
What I'd like to say is that, interestingly, the older clocks, like late 18th century, for example, early 19th, often have biblical illustrations from the Old Testament, for example. And then in later times, people put landscapes or flowers. And there are lots of Mennonite clockmakers who were making clocks in the Vistula Delta and also in South Russia. And the Kroger clock manufacturing family was perhaps the best known one of those clocks. Maybe that is a little bit of your question.
That's great. So you have examples from different clockmakers in your museum?
We have very old clocks and we have more recent, more fancy ones. The older, really the old ones have only one hand to show the hour. Later ones will have two hands and ring more often and become more complex.
Excellent. Wow.
Metal.
And Shelley is asking, the traveling displays look fascinating. How far in advance do you need to book a display?
Well, that's a really good question. COVID has made it easier for people to have more options right now because people were not booking exhibits during that time frame, and we also were busier and weren't promoting as much. So right now we have several exhibits that are booked. On our website, you can see the schedule, and we have some that are available immediately.
Okay. Yeah. In normal times, is there a general suggestion for how far in advance someone should plan to book?
A lot of museums try to book several years out, so their schedules are planned in advance. And so generally speaking, a year or two out is good, but often we have gaps or museums have gaps in their schedule and things work, in a fairly tight time frame as well. On our traveling exhibits web pages, each exhibit lists a schedule and when it's booked and when it's available. So.
Perfect. And Lynette is wondering, was the furniture brought over from the Vistula Delta typical of Polish furniture design, or was it based on Dutch designs and styles?
Very good question. The cradles, which also were cut out of the program, unfortunately, were part of the key furniture. For example, we found through our research by traveling actually, all throughout Northern Europe following the immigration route, the cradle type, that particular style of cradle can be found among the Kashubian indigenous people, if you will, of the Vistula Delta region. We find them in Kashubian museums, for example. The general type goes back to the Netherlands. You can find them in 16th century woodcuts, for example. It's a very old traditional form. So it was basically, Poland has its folk tradition, but the Mennonite furniture that became Mennonite at the point of migration, when it became a thing of identity. In Poland, when the Mennonites lived there, it was the furniture that was fashionable. And, and Mennonite, so like the chest or maybe a wardrobe would be purchased from a Polish or a Prussian furniture maker. or it would be built according to the prevailing dominant style by Mennonite furniture makers. So there was nothing, quote, Mennonite folk. It's not folk art. Does that make sense? And then,
so you are saying it was like common in Polish culture,
it was common. It was the style that we see in Kauffman Museum for the most part. The chests and the wardrobes, for example, they that goes to a style, and this was cut out of my presentation as well. But that is a common Northern European. Early and mid-century style of furniture that is known as Biedermeier. So, and that style basically is derived, or is a, fake Vuitton luggage piece, if you will, or reproduction of a Creider, if you know what I'm talking about. It's imitating the upper class. It goes back to the Napoleonic style. It's known as the Empire style, whose basic forms is based on classical furniture, classical architecture. Hence, if you saw the columns on the side of the dowry chest, for example, either inlaid or painted, a column is a classical motif. And some of inlaid, and also the play with light veneer and with dark inlay is very Biedermeier or neoclassical style.
Wow.
Does that answer it? It's complex.
Yes. It sounds like it. No, that's good. So it was common and it was based on earlier styles and motifs, you're saying. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Appropriated, and when the Mennonites lived in the Vistula Delta, you can trace Mennonite history in the Vistula Delta for 400 years until the end of World War II.
Right.
And so in these 400 years, they acculturated, like Mennonites do in this country.
Of course.
So another topic.
Ruth has a question. She says, my mother traveled from Lugosk, New Samara to Germany in 1920 and then on to Kansas in 1921. She said the chest they bought was made by her father from an organ made with the wood from an orange tree. Is that possible?
I have not come across an orange tree, but she said she came from Russia, right? I mean, yeah. So we do have a wardrobe at Kauffman Museum that is made with applewood veneer.
Oh, okay.
So, what you had available and what worked and what was considered. But orange trees would not be typical of the Vistula. It doesn't grow there.
Right. Okay.
But that's fascinating, yeah.
Lois is saying, at the beginning of the presentation, Andi acknowledged the land of First Nations who originally inhabited the area. What was the interaction of Mennonite immigrants with First Nations, if any, in Kansas? Were there learnings from the First Nations that mitigated the hardships they may have experienced?
So vast majority of Native Americans were removed prior to the Mennonites' arrival. So there weren't a lot of interactions that way. In following years, in the 20th century, and even in the late 1800s, there were missions in Oklahoma. And so the Mennonites were going there in missions. So there were those interactions. Let's see if there's more to that question.
Yeah, does the museum currently have relationship with any of the indigenous people, the Native Americans?
Well, when we developed our permanent exhibit, we have a section on Native Americans, or in our museum, we call it original people. Mm-hmm. And there were consultants brought in from Native American groups. Actually, Reinhild was probably curating at that point, weren't you? So Reinhild tell the story.
Yeah, a lot of the, quite a number of our artifacts that are Native American come from the Cheyenne people. And the reason we have those is because one of the Mennonite missionaries worked with the Cheyenne people, and those artifacts were gifts. And when we curated that exhibition, my husband and I, we invited a Cheyenne elder to discuss the artifacts with them, which ones we could exhibit and which ones not. And for example, I remember him upstairs in storage doing a ceremony that would, what you do with churches when they are not churches anymore. I forget, I don't know what, there is a word for that. So these takes away the sacred aura, basically, secularizes the piece. So we felt, and we worked with an anthropologist who has worked with Cheyenne people for his whole entire career. So we tried to be very sure that we did justice to our connections to Native American people and had their okay for the artifacts that we displayed. Does that answer?
Yes, I think it does. That's great. And Bernil is asking, are there examples of Swiss Anabaptist furniture somewhere?
No, and that is, we don't have any. We did go to Switzerland in our research, in our, traipsing around Europe to wherever Mennonites have lived and are still living. And we found, nothing there in material culture or in folk tradition. As I said, it's not a folk art, and it's
Swiss Valinians.
It's maybe the Swiss Valinians might have the odd piece. We do have we do have one dowry chest that is Swiss Valinian, and the style is quite different, and that would be a regional style in that area of Poland where they lived. That's all I can say.
Okay, no problem. And this one's probably for you too, Reinhild. John is wondering, when did the clockmaker switch to minute hands? I believe you mentioned it in passing.
2 hands.
2 hands.
When they switched to 2 hands, all I can say is read Mr. Kroger's book on Mennonite clocks. I mean, you can find that book online.
At Kauffman Museum in our museum.
And also at the Kauffman Museum store. Go to the store if you can. Don't have Amazon ship your stuff. Anyway, you have an opinionated old woman here. So, I'm not an expert on the mechanisms of clocks, but what I found very fascinating as a footnote is that there is a Polish Mennonite friendship organization, which is international. And when we were in Poland in 1991, the first time, and in 1993, Polish museum people began to pay attention to what they had in Mennonite furniture, in what we now call Mennonite furniture. And according to their collection history, they would have the names of people who had it. But, Mennonites also fled the Vistula Delta after World War II or during World War II and couldn't take anything along. I mean, they were war refugees. And so the material, the stuff, if you will, was around, and it got into their, Polish collections. And about 10 or so years ago, I collaborated with a Polish curator in the Vistula Delta on an exhibition that she was doing on Mennonite furniture and Mennonite presence in the Vistula Delta. So the Polish people are now very cognizant about the role and the contributions that Mennonites have brought to the Vistula Delta, to Poland. So that was very fascinating to see. And there's a whole other dimension that is parallel to that in southern Russia. One of our research trips led us to Polish settlements, not in the Ukraine, but we went because, again, the war erased so much there. But we went to the southern Ural region, where you have daughter colonies of the Kreider colony, and that was in 1991. And it was just at the fall of the Soviet Union. But anyway, when we visit the former Mennonite villages there that were all collectivized during the Soviet regime, local Russian school teachers in these villages had started collections of Mennonite furniture. We were in a couple of former Mennonite churches that had been repurposed during the Soviet era into so-called culture palaces. Now were made into Mennonite museums. And, you know, the dowry chests that had come from the Vistula Delta, the cradles, maybe a wardrobe, a lot of artifacts that had come to them from Mennonites who were now in the process of leaving. The villages were emptying out because they could emigrate to Germany. Right. They preferred to do that at that point. Yeah. So, and what is interesting about clocks, so the clocks that the Mennonites wanted to bring in 1991, when they left to Germany with their other belongings, were considered Russian historical property, and they were not allowed to bring them. So they found ways of smuggling their clocks back if they could. So yeah, so it's a complex, fascinating history.
Wow, that must have been quite a trip. When you must have felt like you were treasure hunting when you went on.
That is very true. And the first time I saw what we call here a Mennonite chest. The first time I saw the same style that we have in, for example, in the Mennonite Library and Archives or in our museum, it was a hallelujah moment when we walked through the townhouse, the Rathaus, the city hall, city hall of Gdansk. And I go up those stairs and I see this thing and I said, okay, this is where this stuff comes from. Because when we started our research, we really didn't know, you know, what this body of furniture and furnishings, you know, where it originated. Yeah. And so there we were, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was a hunt.
Okay, now this is a bit of this is my own question. Why were and maybe are the Mennonites so passionate about clocks? I've seen this and heard this in other circles as well, that those clocks, they traveled with them all around and they're just a really important piece.
Well, as I said earlier, do you have a clock that rings the hour in your house, or who's ticking you here? And it's the only clock in your house? And it was a gift, you know,
right,
for your wedding. Maybe it was a gift to the grandparents.
Yeah.
And it is small enough that you can take it along, and it says home.
Yeah.
And, you know, I left Germany, you know, I mean, I'm not a refugee or anything like that. I married my beloved husband, who happens to be a Kansan. But but things that I have that I could bring that connects me to my family and to my heritage are very important to me. It helps me feel at home, and it expresses my history and my identity. Okay, so
yeah, that's a good explanation. And I know earlier you said it's like the heart of a home, the beating heart of a home.
Yeah, and by now they're antique and they're priceless that way. Yeah.
Beautiful. Now Valerie's asking, would you speak about your museum archives? Do you have an archivist? I'm asking both about your archival collection and your institutional archives, or is that housed somewhere else?
You look like you're ready to talk, Dave.
We're part of Bethel College, which has a Mennonite library and archives. So we collaborate with them on exhibits. The Mennonite library and archives houses the bulk of the paper artifacts, and we deal with more three-dimensional artifacts.
Okay. Does the Genealogy, does the museum have any genealogy resources? Shirley is asking.
We have a few things. We have ship lists of Mennonite immigrants from the 1800s into the early 1900s, but mostly we refer them to John Thiessen at the Mennonite Library and Archives.
Makes sense.
Do you have a Schlafbank from Ukraine in your collection?
Not from Ukraine, as far as we know. They are too large. They're not built to take apart. You know, and if you want to, you know, pay for freight, I mean, you have to be really well-to-do to transport a Schlafbank in one piece. No, but Mennonite craftsmen, you know, the immigrant craftsmen from the Ukraine, they built them here in Kansas. And we have several, and we have also you know, the pull-out back bed. You know, some of the Schlafbanks were made to pull out to be a double bed, but they would also be used as a sofa or sitting bench or resting bench or settee, if you will. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. What a fabulous team effort. I can tell you guys are all passionate about what you do, and you do it with excellence. So thanks again for the presentation, for sticking around for the Q&A.